everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change.
Mm-hmm.
That's mining. Everyone talks about innovation, but traditionally we've been a very conservative business, and there's a reason for that.
Episode 33 of the Crownsmen Podcast. Good morning, hello, good evening, depending on what time you're watching this. I'm your host, Jared Downey. My co-host is Gowdy Molina.
Good morning.
Good morning. Are you ready for our guest today, Roy Slack from Cementation? He's actually the president of the Canadian Institute of Mining, CIM, and he's a director at Cementation Americas. But he is the former president. I'll let him unpack that. I'm going to stop.
Before you make a mistake.
But cementation is, we are going to talk about quite a bit about cementation today. They are the ones they're the mining contractors. They build the mines. And we've done technology and sort of everything around the mines. We haven't really got a chance to talk about the actual building of the mine with a company who does it on the show, which is weird that we haven't done that yet. But anyway, that guest hasn't come in yet. So, and some of the events that CIM puts on. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
Before we do any of that, we have to thank the people that sponsor us.
Yes, that make the Crownsmen Podcast possible. But before I go into that, sorry, Mike, there we go. Before I head into that, I do want to talk about our new Crownsmen specials that we just rolled out. So this is a new series where you can promote your own products or services in a one-on-one interview right here in our podcast studio. Just not this particular studio. So you'll see our new studio there on the screen. And it's a great way for any company to come in, promote, again, products, services, projects, anything in particular that they'd like to highlight. And we actually have DRA Global and Savannah Equipment, who are both coming in, releasing their new specials, and that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay tuned with those new episodes, and let us know if you are looking to have your own little series or own specials, and we'd be happy to help you. You can email us at info@crownsmen.com or visit us at www.crownsmen.com. All right.
Cool.
And now I will go into Savannah Equipment. If you need everything from slurry pumps to jaw crushers to ball mills to conveyors, go to the leader in mining equipment, and that's Savannah Equipment, and you can visit them at savannahequipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day. We're also sponsored by Data Cloud. Does it feel like you're drilling and blasting blind? Could your MWD measurements be better? The Data Cloud platform shows your lithology changes in real time for better blasting and fragmentation profiles. Check out their IoT sensors and cloud computing platform at datacloud.com and learn how you can know your rock today.
Awesome. Can you do me a favor before we go any further? Could you just turn my headphones down just a little bit?
Okay.
My own voice is too loud in my head.
Is that better?
That's good. Yeah, a little bit up.
A little up there?
Perfect.
Right,
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, Rory, welcome to the show. I was telling you before the show, the name Rory is the other owner of this company. So every time I go to that sound, I go Rory. It's very difficult. So I do know your name. It's not that. It's a habit of saying Rory.
No problem.
So, give us a little bit of background about cementation. Cementation, CIM, your sort of role, just so the audience sort of has an understanding of who you are and what you do.
Well, sure. Always happy to talk about cementation, and very proud of the company. We started the current version in 1998, and it was originally cementation out of the UK was interested in establishing or acquiring, I should say, a contractor in North America. And I had my own consulting firm, and they approached me to find a potential acquisition. So I did a review for them. I made a recommendation, which I'll come back to in a minute. made a recommendation, but they had recognized I'd done a couple of startups, and they said, instead of buying a company, would you start one for us? So I went to visit their operations in the UK and South Africa, and I was very impressed with how they did things. So I said, yes. So we started from scratch, hired a few people I knew, and um, I think in the first year we had $24,000 in revenue. Now the company's about $500 million a year in revenue, so it was quite a substantial growth. But it was a real startup. The rest of the story is that the company that I recommended that we acquire, we did buy 4 years later. And that was Aurora Quarrying. And that was, in terms of acquisitions, you hear different stories about acquisitions. That was a fantastic one. In terms of 1 + 1 = 5, instead of 1 + 1 = 1.5. Everything worked well. The people came together. We still have that synergy in terms of expanding geographical coverage, expanding client base, ideal acquisition. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the history of cementation in the Americas, which, in fact, the company works far beyond the Americas now. But yeah, it was very proud of what the team has done, and it's a great company.
I was, I wanted to sort of start off with cementation. It's been everywhere doing work, but it's done. I'd say probably one of the most probably most high profile from publicly. It would be the work they did in Chile. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Certainly, we were working. We had a company based in Santiago and doing work in South America, and mainly in Chile, Terra Sem was the name of the company. So Terra Services and Cementation. It was a joint venture with a local company. We were doing a raise bore hole for Codelco in the Atacama region where the San Jose mine was. And then we saw on the news that these 33 miners were trapped underground. This was 2010. Mm-hmm. So we were quite nearby. We very quickly put a proposal together and sent it to the government. We didn't really know who to send it to because the San Jose mine was, in a kind of a state of confusion as to a plan on how we would get the miners out. And because we had equipment very nearby, we became Plan A. Mm. So they brought us in. We set up a raise bore machine. We began to drill down. It was 700 meters from the point of our machine to where they believed the miners were, because right at the start there was no communication. They didn't know if they were alive or where they were, but there was a refuge station. So we began drilling towards that station. In the meantime, they had broken a diamond drill hole through and found out that all 33 were alive. So there were 3 different plans. The Chilean government did a very smart thing, is they had 3 different plans to rescue the miners, and it was actually Plan B that broke through first. It was a bit of a race, but a lot of Canadian involvement and people sometimes don't know this. So Cementation Canada was our equipment that was on Plan A, and our people that were supervising that. Plan C was actually a group from Calgary doing the drilling as well. But very interesting, a small project in terms of scope, the type of projects we do, but probably the most high-profile project we've ever done. And we were all very happy to see the miners all get out safely. So
yeah, that story was everywhere when that came out.
Yeah.
Was it? Had you been involved in projects like those sort of rescue type things before, or was that sort of a one-off?
And definitely a one-off.
Yeah.
And there are some very interesting aspects to it. It was technically challenging, and I won't get into the tricky parts of it, but the way the industry came together, and some of the equipment that would probably take 3 or 4 months to design, we were designing in 1 or 2 weeks. There was such a sense of urgency, working around the clock with people in different countries. It was a great example of how the global mining industry can pull together and really do achieve something great. So very small scope, but huge cooperation across the globe. It was very inspiring.
Yeah. The curious side of me is going to get the better. So, what were some of the technical? What were some of the technical? If it's not too much. To dig
Okay,
into?
well, yeah, sure. Happy to go into that. The approach we had was raise boring, and with raise boring, what you do is you drill, let's say, a 15-inch hole. I'm going to switch from inches to metric. Sorry, but
Yeah.
I work in both. But
Okay.
a 15-inch hole down, and then we would put a reamer on it, and we would ream it out to about 30 inches diameter, and that would be big enough to bring people up. The problem is, to do that, you need access below. We didn't have access below because the
Right.
mine had caved in. So what we were going to do was we were going to do a down ream, which has some challenges. It usually isn't done beyond 100 meters, but we had to do 700 meters. But in the Chilean paper, there was an interview with a local university professor, and he said, if they're going to raise bore it, of course they're going to drill a pilot hole, and then they're going to lower the reamer down the pilot hole. And we thought, well, first of all, he didn't really know what he was talking about. But then we thought, that's not a bad idea. So that's when we started engineering this unique system where we could, in a 15-inch hole, we could lower all the parts so that the miners could put them together so we could up-ream.
Oh.
So that's, instead of some of the traditional methods, this innovative approach, and we got together with groups from Australia and South Africa and Germany, different suppliers and companies, and brainstormed this. And within, I think, 5 days, we had a design, and Atlas Copco put that together. And then we looked around the world who could manufacture this very quickly, and found a group in Sudbury that had the material in stock. So it all came together. It was amazing how quickly it came together, because when you look at an innovative idea, it usually takes time and effort and review and review and review. But this was a great collaborative effort, and so that's about as technical as I'll get into.
Is one more question on it though? Does that carry over to anything else? Like doing that sort of innovation, does it ever get used again, or is that sort of one-off? Or does it go, that could actually work?
It did get used again, and the reason I know that is after we did the job, we donated the equipment to Science North in Sudbury, and they put it on display at Dynamic Earth, which is their underground science center. And I visited there a year or two later, and it wasn't there. And I said, where did it go? They said, well, Atlas Copco needed it for a project. So that was really good, because it was like an $80,000 piece of equipment, but very specialized. But that's great. They found work for it. So
That's pretty
That's awesome.
amazing.
Yeah.
Some of these major projects that you said, like on a scale that was fairly small, but some of these big projects, like you did the Nickel Rim South, I think it's called, shaft in Sudbury. So what sort of scale? I think we would bring up some pictures of that, but what sort of scale is that product?
that was a very exciting project for us. It was 2 shafts. The shafts, I won't get the numbers exactly right, but I think they were about 1,600 meters deep, give or take. So relatively deep shafts. And then we also did the development, and for us it was a design build. So we designed the shafts and we sunk them. So the engineering and the construction with our own people. So a great project for us. I don't remember the full, I'm thinking 250 million, something like that would have been our scope in the project. We started, when we started the company, one of the early projects we were awarded was on-upping depth with Falconbridge. So Falconbridge, Xstrata, Glencore, long-term client, had a lot of faith in us when we were small, and we delivered for them, and they remembered that. And so we were successful with Nickel Rim and great project, no lost time injuries. It was on budget, on schedule, which is not the norm in this day and age. If we get to talk about capital projects, we'll talk about that. But a project we're very proud of, and very close working relationship with the owner, and it just all those things that make a project great. So
On a so if your scope is 250 million, I mean that's just a huge scope of work. And so when they're coming to you with a project like that, do they have a preliminary design and then you redesign it for the best operation, or do they come and say, "We've done our testing. This is where we need to get to. Tell us how to do it."
so with both.
Both.
Okay, but I'll explain nickel rim. Nickel rim, they brought us in at pre-feasibility study. So we developed the designs for them based on their requirements, and we also developed the budgets. Okay. So going from a pre-feasibility to a feasibility, and then to the detailed design, and then construction. So through that process, we had developed a budget, and that budget kind of morphed into our contract, so to speak.
Right.
So it's a very logical way to do a project, but not typical in our industry.
Oh, it's not typical.
No.
No.
No, usually a group will do a feasibility study, they'll develop a budget, and then the owner will go out to tender, number of contractors will bid it.
Right.
So, but this was the continuity and the engagement right from square one was all there, and I think that's part of the success of the project. But,
Right.
yeah.
Are you on a project like that, when you're designing how you're going to do everything and operate, you're not just using your own people though either, right? You're bringing in other contractors for specific parts of the project. Is that right?
Yeah, the design work itself, we do the design of the surface facilities and the shaft. We wouldn't do the design of the office building, for example. That's the specialty of another group, or the fill plant, or the processing plants like that. But the head frame, the hoist building, the shaft itself, we would design that. Now, in terms of the work, we would have a subcontractor do the head frame.
Right.
Usually a local group, just makes sense. And then it would be our own people, our direct hire people that do all the underground work.
Yeah.
So
Does it still? I want to move on to some of these other projects, but does it still amaze you? I mean, you've been in mining longer than I have. I've been around it kind of my whole life in some ways, but it sort of never ceases to amaze me what they build, what's get designed. That even from the equipment end all the way to the design of the mines. Does it ever sort of stop amazing you what is built?
That's a real interesting question, and it's almost like we discussed that beforehand, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Because when we had our 20th anniversary recently, and I talked to our people, and I reminisced when I was a student, and I went to Queen's University in mining engineering, and I worked at GECO in Manitowoc, in Northern Ontario, and one day they put me on the shaft inspection crew. So riding the cage and going down the shaft, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, how on earth would they ever have built this? So I got a technical paper from one of the engineers there and I read that, and I still didn't know how they built it. I'm still in awe of what our people do. And it's when you start to look at all the different elements and how it's done, from an engineering perspective, you can engineer it, but when you actually go down there and see it done, it is pretty amazing. Still amazes me.
Yeah. And everything's different. That's what mining is so amazing.
Yeah.
Is that it's every project. Like you brought up pictures of that in Chile. But then you go up into the mountains in BC, for instance. It's the terrain and everything. It's always so different. It's never the same project.
Well, I worked at Equity Silver for a summer in British Columbia, and I remember my supervisor asking me where I was from, and I grew up in Kingston, so I said in Kingston, Ontario, and he said, the only good thing to come out of the east is the sun. So I didn't talk any more about where I was from. That was the message was clear. But I had a great summer in Houston, just outside of Smithers, and did a job there. And so I've had the opportunity to work really coast to coast. I worked at Ile de Madeleine, the Magdalen Islands, off the coast, and the salt mine. I worked in BC, and really from coast to coast to coast. So it's a fantastic country, and I've been privileged.
Yes.
So
We all are to be involved in it. And then the Gold Corp, you did Gold Corp Red Lake. That's raised boring, so that's similar to what we were talking about, but obviously in a different. That's a pretty large scale project as well, isn't it?
it is, and what happened at Red Lake is, and what happens traditionally, people will wonder why we sink two shafts at once. So Nickel Rim was an example of that. Piccadilly, Red Lake, they were looking at two shafts. The reason you do that is if you sink one shaft, you've got so much ventilation underground, and the ventilation dictates how fast you can do the development.
Mm.
If you sink two shafts, you've got a full vent system, and you can put a lot more equipment down, and you can develop to the ore body quicker. So often the approach was to sink two shafts. Red Lake was interested in two shafts, but what we did was said we can sink one shaft and go off different levels and do a raise bore hole beside it. The unique thing about Red Lake, it's the largest raise bore hole that was ever done in hard rock in North America at 5.5 meters diameter. So I think that's 18 feet, something like that in feet and inches. But that was the start of large diameter raise boring in Canada.
Oh, and this is a vertical
Hole cut.
Yeah.
So it wasn't drill and blast, it's cut. And so that became their vent shaft, where we were sinking their service shaft. But instead of sinking two shafts, we sank the shaft and raise bored one beside it.
Oh.
So saved them quite a bit of money in terms of capital. Was also achieved everything they needed in terms of the mine design. But Gold Corp placed their faith in us because it was a new approach to North America, and the Canadian Shield is known to be quite hard.
Mm-hmm.
So cutting is a challenge there. But the job worked well. Since then, we've done many raise bore holes of that size. So we introduced that large diameter raise boring to North America at Red Lake.
Oh, I didn't realize. And when you said about bringing up this project, in the pre-interview, I didn't realize that was the initial one of that scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I want to talk out in Michigan. Was actually I should double check. You did a mine, Eagle Mine was that in Michigan?
Yeah, we're still there, still doing work there.
Oh, that's an ongoing project.
That's an ongoing project, and we started at Eagle doing some raise boring. That was the first part of it, and then we were awarded the development, and the job went very well, and they kept us on to do the contract mining. So we do all their underground work for them.
Oh.
It's gone very well, and it's a great partnership with Lundin, who's the client. It's just west of Marquette, so in the Upper Peninsula, a beautiful area of Michigan, and so I'm trying to think if we've been there 6 or 7 years now, but it's we talk about we build mines, but we also mine mines. But that didn't fit into the marketing. The byline was if we say we build mines, we mine mines, we do this, we do that. So we kept it short. But the reality is we do contract mining as well, and that's an example.
Is that a big part of the business? Because I actually didn't realize that.
It's not as prevalent in North America. In certain Australia, there's a lot of contract mining. In other areas of the world, there is. We're doing Hope Bay in Nunavut. We do the production development for Diavik in Northwest Territories. We do.
Yeah, that was another project.
Yeah.
That's a Diavik diamond mine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do some contract mining. It's not the major part of our volume, but it's for certain mines it fits well, and we're very happy to do it. So
What's the advantage or disadvantage? Like in Australia, you're saying that they're doing a lot of it here. They're not as much. Is there sort of what's sort of the trade off for, like, will you see it go one way, like over in North America? Will you see a shift towards contract mining over time?
There's a lot of things involved. Some of the major mining companies have agreements with their employees through unions or other things,
Oh.
and so they're about creating jobs internally and preserving those
Right.
jobs. If a mine has a relatively short mine life, it may make sense to contract mine it out rather than establish HR and your hiring policies
Right,
and all
yeah.
those things that you need to do. Some mining companies are more about exploration than they are about operations. Certainly the large mining companies are very experienced in operations, but some companies say, well, if you've got that experience and can do it, that's not our prime skill set.
Right.
So there's different reasons for it. And I can't really tell you why it became so popular in Australia. It could be reduction in capital costs for the owners. It could be there were companies there that were experienced in it, so it was a good option for them. I'm not quite sure why it took off there.
Yeah, you were kind of dovetailing into that. These capital projects, trying to keep something on schedule, on time, and that's always a challenge in the industry, especially with the different variables. Is there something specific that a company like Cementation does that actually keeps things? Is there a way that's done differently than the 5 other companies that do a similar thing?
When we so this is a topic I love to talk about. So we don't have 6 hours, but
I will get you back on.
when we started cementation, one of the we really targeted a vision of changing the industry. And there were 3 things we wanted to change in the industry. One was we wanted to make it safe, not just safer, but safe. So safety was a primary goal. We wanted to reintroduce design build. It kind of got out of our type of business, and we thought it was a good way to do things. And we wanted to eliminate adversarial relationships. There was you want to say the traditional or the stereotypical owner-contractor battling over costs, and we'd seen how that didn't work well. And so we looked at different contract formats, different ways where we could build alignment early on. So the contractor and the owner were working together. So we've really tried to focus on some things. So between the design build and the type of agreements and the working relationships we build with our clients, we've tried to change some of that. When it comes to capital projects in general, there's a very interesting study done a couple of years ago by a gentleman from U of T, I think. And it's not just mining. Capital projects, infrastructure projects around the world traditionally are over budget and behind schedule.
Yeah.
And the human factor is a big part of that. Is we are an optimistic bunch, and I like to say underestimation is underestimated. We tend to be optimistic when we look at budgets and schedules. We don't like to put as much risk in. I don't know if it's cultural or if it's just human nature, but there's different behavioral elements in how we do projects that we need to look at beyond the technical aspects. So
that leads me to and it's something I'm always trying to find that balance. Is how much of, when you said that sort of that adversarial relationship between the owner and the contractor, and that's pretty much across any type of industry, any sort of where you're building something. How much of it is that relationship is from a technical standpoint, and how would I, when you're planning that, how much is it about the company's culture when you're actually dealing with that owner? Or how much of it is from a practical planning standpoint that maintains that relationship? I know it's a mixture of both, but it sort of where is the focus on when you're doing these types of projects?
Well, I'll give you a specific example. I may not answer your question, but I'll give you an example I think addresses it. We're working with a client we've known for a while, and there's mutual trust there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're developing a contract, and we agreed to make a change, and we redraft the contract and don't put the change in. You know, they're looking through it, they're saying, oh, they missed that. Well, we'll pick that up and correct it. If you don't know the client and there's not that base of trust, it's, how come they didn't put that in? Why are they trying to trick us?
Right.
It's kind of a subtle difference, but that whole trust base makes the relationship much more durable, because there are going to be bumps in the road. It's these capital projects, underground, there's always things that come up and challenges and there's risks. And that strong working relationship at the start, you know, I'm trying not to do a marriage analogy here, but there's an obvious analogy.
It comes up quite often on the show, actually.
But you know, it's very real, and it's hard to evaluate that technically or from a project management standpoint,
Right.
but it can make a big difference on any project.
Yeah. Do you think part of the issue, just from on the contractor side, is that, I mean, you've bid on lots of jobs. Our company's been involved in bidding on projects just in a different space. And it's always this line between, you know, sort of, even if they haven't told you, you sort of know where the budget they want it to be, but you kind of also know where it should be. But are you in some ways saying that relationship, you have to have it established beforehand? Because if you, actually this, in this sense, if you come and it's a new company that you haven't worked with before, and you're going, well, they need to spend about 20% more, which when you're dealing with a $250 million project, that's huge. And investors, if it's a public company, they're going to see that.
Yeah.
There's so many spin-off effects of going to them. So how tempting is it to go, well, we can do it for this?
So what we've done as a company, when we started the company, we established this, or right from the start, we intended to build this culture, what we call best for project. And what best for project is it's not about the money. So if you come to me and you say, we want to establish access to our ore body, we'll look at how to do it safe. We'll look at how to save capital on it. Our initial focus is to give you what you want and to make it something that's going to be long-term and operable. And it's not about how much money can we make from it. That's an odd position to be in as a contractor, not to be focused on the profit. But we preach that all the time to our people and look at best for project decisions. When you have a decision to make on a project, what is going to be best for the project in the long run? And if it costs cementation money, that's okay, because that long run and those long-term clients are what have made our company successful. Yeah. So how do you maintain those relationships?
So do you lose? So out of 10 projects, do you lose money on 2 of them because of that culture?
No.
No.
But we don't win a number of projects we bid.
Right.
Because we'll look at a project and we'll say we will bid an alternate approach, because we say, well, we don't think this approach is best for project. There may be some risk. There may be some different things. But here is how we would do it, and here's our price. And if you're interested, we can talk. And sometimes if you don't bid the base case, you're just off the list.
Right.
But what we found, we recently finished a project in Godrich. The initial request for proposal came out, and we felt there were some real high-risk items to the mine. At a salt mine, there's always a risk of water inflows. So we came in with a different proposal, and we said we would propose to do it this way. It's not the way you planned it, but we think it really de-risks your project, and if you want to talk to us about it. They liked our proposal, and we got the job. So, sometimes you're off the list because you didn't bid the base case. Sometimes the client recognizes that our approach might be better for them, and it is a best for project approach, and we get the job. So So, you stick with your values and your vision, and if it works, great. And if we don't get the job, well, part of contracting is not getting work.
Right.
You
Yeah.
can't lose too much sleep over losing a bid because you lose more than you win is the
Yeah.
reality. But
But cementation's been doing it for 30.
we celebrated our 20th anniversary
20th.
last year, so 21 years.
Yeah.
1998.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of the people that are watching these. I mean, there's definitely people that are bidding on jobs in all industries watching the show, and the reason I wanted to sort of dig into it a bit is because it's hard if you're only 5 or 6 years old and you need that, especially if you're tied to a bank or something. I mean, you need these contracts, and it's hard to play that long game. I mean, you can do
Absolutely.
a presentation and say it's going to be this and it's going to be that, but when the payroll comes in and the taxes are coming in and the bank is wanting their funds, and it's so tempting. It's so
Yeah.
tempting.
So we went through that. So, my own experience, I was a partner in a company called BLM in Sudbury, small contractor, and we started out the traditional way. We'd take a small project, hoping to work our way up. And a couple things happened. One, we were funded by the bank.
Yeah.
The bank doesn't like rapid growth. Contracting is all about rapid growth. If you don't grow quickly, you get pigeonholed. And we became recognized as a local contractor that did construction, and we were successful, but never really considered for the major projects. So when we started cementation, there was a couple of things that we focused on. One, the biggest projects. Even though we were brand new, we said there's 5 projects we're going after, and they're the 5 largest projects in Canada at that time. The other thing we did is the Caverner Group, which owned cementation in the UK, they were our bank. And they
Huge
understood
difference.
contracting.
Yeah.
And they knew, you're going to buy some equipment, there's going to be some investment, but that's what you need to get these large projects. And a bank, it would be very difficult to convince a bank of that. So those lessons learned at BLM really benefited us when we started cementation.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to do. We should throw in the other sponsors, and then we'll do a little transition into some of your background and
Sure.
personal your personal life. Not
Alrighty. So we are also brought to you by Streamline. Streamline offers a complete package of fleet management solutions with 3 incredible products. First up, NaviStream, their onboard intelligence and telematics system. NaviLink, their vehicle automation and IoT platform. And Dagama, their dynamic transportation management system. And you can visit them at stti.com for the Streamline advantage. All right.
Streamline was a guest on our show. They're doing some neat stuff in the transportation world.
Well, I was going to comment because I'm listening to your sponsors, and it is a bit of a snapshot of what's happening in our industry because we're at a stage where we can collect all kinds of data, but that's not enough. You got to figure out what to do with that data. And some of your sponsors so I'm plugging your sponsors here. I'm trying to help out. But,
Well, it's all the
it is a
industries
great
overlapped,
fit.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to let's do a little transition and get to know you a little bit more, and where you started. I know you mentioned you went to school at Queen's University.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Kingston, so my parents said, "You're going to Queen's." Okay. I went to Queen's. I was in arts, and I was majoring in psychology.
Wow.
And what happened was, after my second year, I'd run out of money. So I was going to have to work for a year. And a friend of mine was going into mining engineering. And he said, if you apply for a job at GECO in Manitowoc, tell them you're going into mining, you'll get the job. I said, really? And I think they were paying like $5 an hour, which was big money, and you could work overtime. And so I was going to be able to. So I applied, and sure enough, I got the job. So I had my maths and chemistries and physics because I'd done a general arts, and so I applied to transfer into engineering. And this may not be a great promo of mining, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So I went to an interview with the dean of engineering at Queen's, and he looked at my transcript, and he said, well, he said, your marks aren't that great. He said, maybe you could go into mining or geology or metallurgy. So I said, well, you know what? I've got a summer job at a mine, so I'll go into mining. So it was completely arbitrary.
Wow.
I think the psychology background helped a little bit because there's some characters you deal with in our industry.
There's a few. We've had a few on the show that are, and people love them.
Yeah. But yeah, so I did mining engineering at Queen's. And when I got out of school, I had this great job at Crow's Nest Resources in Calgary. And it was a job everyone in our class wanted, and two of us got it. It must have been a good interview because I didn't get it from the marks. But 2 weeks before we were to head out to Calgary, they called and said, there's been a downturn, and we've had to lay off engineers, and your job's no longer available.
Oh no.
So Redpath was hiring summer. So I hired on, although I graduated, I hired on as a summer student with Redpath and went to Ile de Madeleine, a little island which is a Quebec, part of Quebec. Very different French than mainland French. But so I worked at the salt mine there, and after that went to Dome, number 8 shaft. So did a shaft at Ile de Madeleine in the salt mine, went to Dome, did number 8 shaft, a big project in Timmins. Went from there up to Hemlo. It was when 3 mines were found in the mid-'80s, and we sunk the Lac shaft, which became Williams shaft. And went and ran a project in Val-d'Or, and then did different things. And then in '89, we started that company in Sudbury. So that's the background. I met my wife in Timmins when we were doing the Dome project. And we've got 2 kids, 3 grandkids, and that's the short bio.
That's great. And with your time in mining, have you found a project that's really stood out for you?
There's many. Certainly learned some things. Stood out is different than successful.
Yeah.
So you learn from the good ones and the bad
We're
ones.
allowed to talk about it all on the
Yeah.
show.
The project we did in Timmins, there were fatalities on that project. And that was an eye-opener for me as a young engineer. Wow, we're in an industry where... So many people in an industry that promote safety, have some impactful event in their background that's encouraged them to do so. Same with me. So that was a very good project. I learned a lot there, but also my eyes got opened as to some of the safety issues in our industry. And I'm very proud to say our industry has gone miles and miles in terms of safety from those days. Certainly the project at Nickel Rim we talked about, it wasn't an easy project, but it was a successful project. And it was like all those things we were trying to do came together, in terms of a working relationship, in terms of design build, that vision of how to, the perfect project on purpose, if you want an alliteration. But all of that came together on that project. Piccadilly, a twin shaft in New Brunswick for Potash Corp, was an interesting project. We tried some things that didn't work. It was a successful project, no injuries, the shafts went down fine. We tried this design change to make things safer and easier, and we worked with the client and other consultants on it. When all was said and done, it didn't work. So we went in and fixed it at our cost. And that's our philosophy as a company. We still have a good relationship with the owner. They recognize that, so when we talk about innovation, we have to be prepared to what we say is try those things that don't put our people at risk, that don't
Right.
put, that don't jeopardize the safety of our people. But that project was interesting in a different way because we innovated and we tried something. It worked, but in the long term it didn't. So we went back in and fixed it at our cost. And that's what design build is all about, is accountability.
Right.
So so that's just a few. I could go on and on because there's, the
There's so
projects.
many.
Projects still excite me, we're a project-based company. But that's a
Yeah.
few examples.
On the note of innovation and technology, how much has that impacted uh, the industry?
So I think it's Tolstoy that said it all. So I'll paraphrase Tolstoy because it describes our industry to a T. Um, Everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change.
Mm-hmm.
That's mining. Everyone talks about innovation, but traditionally we've been a very conservative business, and there's a
Right.
reason for that. There's so much risk in all the different elements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With commodity pricing, capital costs,
Yeah.
operating costs. So, but after saying that, it's really encouraging what's happening now. There's much more interest and acceptance of innovative ideas. Your sponsors are an example of that,
Yeah.
how the mining industry is embracing data, but
Yeah.
also doing it smartly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you don't collect thousands and thousands of data points.
Yeah.
You collect them and then you need them analyzed before you can actually use them.
Right.
The conversion from diesel to battery, that's ongoing in the mining industry. Uh, it's environmentally um, supportive, but it's really being driven by cost. The
Right.
reality is.
Yeah.
We were in Disrupt Mining. We were a winner in 2017. Very interesting process. I presented to the Sharks Tank group, which included Herjavik and Rob McEwen and a
Mm-hmm.
couple other people. And it was, that's the most time I ever spent preparing for a 5-minute presentation, I'll tell you that. But very exciting, and it was, although it was showtime, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you need that too. You need that to spur innovation on. So there's a
Yeah.
number of things happening in our industry now that really encourage us that there's a new openness
Mm-hmm.
to new ideas and innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an exciting time. We're seeing some different ways shafts are being sunk, and we've got a conference coming up in November looking at, and we've got, I think, papers from 11 different countries on how they're doing it. The Chinese delegation has 6 papers in, and everyone's doing things a little differently, but you can see
Mm-hmm.
a major step change happening going from drill and blast to cutting technology. And so these are step changes, so they're not optimization, but these are going from here to here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an exciting time to be in mining, and it's an exciting time to be a young person in mining because so much depends on the technical expertise of our people. And I gave a speech to the graduating class at Nipissing University a couple of years ago, and what I explained to them is some of us who are older, our culture was to avoid change. We want stability, right? In business, we want stability, we want predictability.
Yeah.
But the world's changing so quickly, and I really believe that younger people, change is just part of what they grew up through.
Yeah.
And it's happening very quickly. So they're much more able to adapt to change than some of us older people are. So it is a young person's game, and the ability to innovate and to implement that innovation is a young person's game too. So it's an exciting time for young people to be in our industry.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Have you encountered any major challenges throughout your career?
The interesting question. Well, absolutely. I think everyone does. Contracting was about moving around, and so my wife and our family were very supportive. Any project that was more than 6 months in duration, we moved there.
Cool.
That is not as much an option today for young people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a challenge for us. But when I say that, every place we went, we really enjoyed, and there are great projects, and it worked out well. It was a challenge, but it worked out well. But I really see it as a challenge for our younger people today who, where there's two careers and people aren't as mobile, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I was actually going to talk a little bit about the young people getting into mining, and I remember this was probably, I don't know, 7 years ago now, and I very distinctly, I think I've told the story a few times on the show. I distinctly remember sitting in an audience. There might have been a few students there, but as a working professional, I'm pretty sure I was probably the youngest person in the
okay,
room. And there was a speaker, Mauro Chiesa was one of the keynote speakers. And he was one of the older people on the panel, and there was probably 4 or 5 other people there. And he was speaking, and he was all about innovation and the new way of doing, collaborating with local communities and the technology. And I distinctly remember him saying, he said, nowadays you're talking to a young person and they're on your phone, and as you're telling them how things are going to do, what's going to get done and everything like that. And you go, well, why are you on your phone? And they go, well, I did it. I'm doing what you're saying to do. And it struck me is that he was saying it was a good thing. And I remember there was a couple of people that were actually quite a bit younger on the panel, and they actually had a bit of almost rolling their eyes at him.
Yeah.
He was saying that, like, in a few years we're going to be looking at a mine through like this big, like a holograph. We're going to be fixing it kind of like on Iron Man type thing.
Yeah.
And
which we're doing now.
And people kind of, and they chuckled.
Iron Man. We're not elevating with the boots or
Yeah.
anything, but the rest of this stuff's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and they chuckled at him.
Yeah.
And so it always struck me sitting there. And so I went up and I met him after, and we became friends since then. And it always struck me is that age is a factor, but it's so much of a mindset, because he was one of the oldest and I was one of the youngest. But his mindset was, this is going to change. And now the things he was discussing that people were chuckling at are, when I go to an event, it's a normal conversation to have. It's everybody's talking about it. And so it's always, and I always I hope more younger people get into mining, but I hope there's, that collaboration between that experience and youth is just so important.
Yeah.
It's because if you don't have that, an industry can go the wrong direction, or it can get stuck in the mud. And there's that collaboration and realizing that as much as it is age, sometimes it's also that people looking for the right people that have the right mindset. I'm sure when you're bringing people in to build a company, you're looking for people that want to push forward and come up with a new way of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talk about in contracting, appetite for risk. We have zero appetite for risk when it comes to safety.
Right.
But when you look at trying different things, you've got to evaluate them, but you have to actually try them.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I presented at the business class in Nipissing University and talked about the importance of building relationships. Everyone's expecting technical presentation, and I'm talking about relationship building. And then I posed a question to the class. I said, in terms of communication, what's the best way to build a relationship? Now, people in my age group would say face-to-face, like we're talking now.
Right.
But the majority of people in that class voted for texting. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't think it was wrong. I thought it was interesting. So I asked them why, and they said, well, you get your ideas across quickly. They're clear. If they're not understood, you can ask.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those things that don't happen in a face, we talk, and then after I go away saying, oh, Jared was saying this, and you're saying, no, I was.
Yeah.
There's Flight of the Conchords, or is it Brett and Michael, the two talking, and the one guy says, are you thinking what I'm thinking? The second guy says, no, I'm thinking what I'm thinking. And that's communication, right? But what the students were saying is, if I do it by text or email, then it's clear and someone can ask questions of it and I have a record of it. And so it was just a different mindset. It wasn't right or wrong. It was and that speaks to how we work between generations.
Yeah.
So if I'm expecting a face-to-face conversation and that person is uncomfortable with that, and they're much more comfortable to see it in writing and then they understand exactly, then, how do we get together and make it all work?
Do you see a younger generations who are coming into the mining industry? Do you see a difference in how they communicate in person, though? Has that is it? Do you the more things change, the more they stay the same, or do you actually see a difference with how somebody who's 25 years old getting into the industry from how you were when you were 25, or how your group was?
So I won't talk about me when I was 25, but I will answer your question because traditionally there's a stereotype that engineers are poor communicators. That's correct.
Although they're all
There's always exceptions.
The engineers on the show are some of the longest views, so it's a funny thing.
Yeah.
People like the technical.
Yeah, but the young engineers within cementation, we've got a Toastmasters club,
Oh,
which sounds odd, but
that's interesting.
it's a way to improve your ability to express your thoughts and your views. Most of Toastmasters is about listening. And the biggest challenge in communication I've seen with, I won't even say young people, it's with everyone, is their ability to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all thinking quickly, and when you're mentioning something, I'm thinking, oh, that reminds me of that story, and then I don't hear the rest of what you said.
Yeah.
So that's a practiced art, the art of listening. And that's probably the biggest challenge we have with, but you don't want to dampen spirits either.
Right.
People are excited about something, so they're chomping at the bit to tell their story. But, what is it? Seek to understand before you seek to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's Dale Carnegie. It's one of the, it's not Dale Carnegie, but I can't remember if it's Collins or one of the business writers. But it's so true. In our business, when a client wants a job done, we've got to listen to that client. And that sounds obvious, but it doesn't happen too often. We're all of a sudden saying, we can do it this way, and we can do this, and we're great, and
Yeah.
you should hire us, instead of sitting and listening to what they really want and how they want it done.
Yeah.
So,
Well, going back to, I think young people is, and I run into it because I'm the same way. I listen and my mind starts churning, and by the time I'm about a quarter of the way through the conversation, I've already got it figured out.
Yeah.
And if you just take a breath and listen, because the things you already know.
Yeah.
You really have no need to share them until it's your turn. And you get to add in all these other tools while someone's talking. I remember a teacher said to me, if you have a teacher, I still don't know if I 100% agree, but I get the idea. If you learn one key thing from a teacher, it was worth your time.
mm-hmm.
And I've always, and I've thought about it. Every teacher I've ever had, I've learned at least one thing from. And it's a very powerful tool. And if you're listening, you get to add in all the stuff you already have. You get to add one little extra tool on it. It can make a huge difference.
Yeah. That's the old joke. My wife was telling me I didn't listen to her, and I can't remember what else she said. So anyway, but it's so true, because you when your brain starts moving, you're already formulating your answer. But
yeah, and it teaches you
so
control and discipline and everything else. Before we go, I want to talk about just quickly about your role at CIM and all the. I mean, they have events, and so I want to get that out there before we wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. CIM is I've been involved in it for a long time, and it's a great honor to be in as president. And there's lots of things we're doing. There's about 10,000 members across Canada. There's branches, there's societies. There's about 25 branches, 10 societies, and then there's a national membership. And I've got this exciting, I wouldn't call it a vision, but just I'm picturing, what if these 10,000 people were working together to make mining better? What if we're all working together to let the rest of Canada know what a great industry it is? So we're working on some things to do that, to leverage that one CIM and get that impactful message out. CIM is about knowledge curation, so it's not a lobby group; it's a technical group.
Right.
And capturing the technical presentations. So you guys are a role model for us. The way you capture this, and we're saying if we could only do that with the 300 presentations happening in Vancouver this week. So that's what we're starting to do, to develop the CIM Academy, where we capture these things, we structure them so people can go into the topics that they're interested in, and instead of, we want people to come to the conferences, but we know that not everyone can.
Yeah.
So how do you share that knowledge? Another project I'm very excited about, we're working with Science North on an exhibition for young people that travels across the country.
Oh, neat.
And the Mining for Society that we've done before, over a 10-year period, we reached out to about 75,000 kids. They would come to these displays and try and understand what's happening. The format we're looking at with Science North is in major science centers across the country year-round, and we're looking at as many as 300,000 visitors a year. So it's just exponential compared to what we've done in the past, and it's all about telling the public what a great industry we are, how safe it is, how high-tech, opportunities for kids. And I will do, the surveys we've done, the public recognize the importance of minerals. They're not as fond as how we mine them.
Right.
And there's perceptions out there that mining is a contributor to climate change. And I'll tell you what I've been telling people is mining is the solution.
Mm-hmm.
The copper that goes into electric cars, the metals and minerals that go into solar panels, all of those things that are going to make us less dependent on diesel or on fossil fuels are generated through mining. So that perception that, the real story is that we're going to be a major part of the solution. The concerns about our relations with First Nations and Aboriginal people across the country, we have partnerships with 13 different groups. We work from coast to coast to coast. We've got great working relationships, and we've seen it generate career opportunities, jobs. We've seen the income benefit the communities. There's so many pluses, but there's still that perception that there's an adversarial relationship, and that's the exception, not the rule. So
we've got a little friend flying around.
Yeah.
That we've had several Indigenous leaders, and we're going to have more people from the community on our show, and it's one of the personal frustrations of mine, because I grew up in this community. I grew up in a rural area.
Yeah.
Growing, I went to a school that was on reserve land at one point.
Okay.
So, it's very frustrating for me, because there are people that are, like in any community, there are people that are anti-mining or anti-oil or whatever. You need those people. You kind of need to create that balance. But it does frustrate me that in a mainstream, if I just turn on the radio, let's say, I'm only hearing the leaders that are opposing this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 20 communities that are for it, that have signed off on it, and there's 3 that are opposing. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't. They absolutely should get the airtime. But the other organizations and leadership, these in the First Nations community that have formulated these partners, they should also get an airtime. And sometimes it's very frustrating for me, because then even I'm here in Vancouver, and so I always, especially with this show, but even before, I just naturally the way I am, I'm always trying to see how people perceive things. So I will purposely bring up Indigenous culture in a casual conversation, and people's perception of how the Indigenous people view things is so often, it's not just a little bit off, it is way, way off.
Yeah.
And that is because of the information they're getting, which is it's so unfair to those communities. And then the people that are the people that are trying, these industrial people that are pushing forward, now they're going against a cultural view of who they are. It's the most unreasonable thing. And so on our show, we haven't tried to come on and just say, well, we brought Frank Antoine, he has a tourism company. He wants to keep everything beautiful.
Yeah.
But he also recognizes that his nephews and nieces, and they need good jobs, and that. So how do you work together? And that's how most reasonable people in any community, that's how they perceive it. And so it's a little sort of a side goal of our show to bring in leaders from these communities, not necessarily that say they support everything, but at least get a chance to say what their viewpoints, where their community stands, not just kind of push this narrative that there's three communities that are opposing everything.
Yeah. I think I've mentioned this before about safety, but I see it too in our Aboriginal relationships, is that the industry has gone from one of compliance to commitment.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is there were laws, there was legislation that the mining groups had to follow. That was the first step to get us to be more responsible, because the reality is there's a history there.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
The industry wasn't always doing the right thing. So legislation was put in place. So companies had to meet that legislation, but most companies now have gone far beyond that legislation. So it's gone from an industry of compliance to one of commitment for all the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moral imperative, there's a business model or a business justification as well. There's social pressures. Those social pressures aren't a bad thing.
No, they're not.
They allow us to understand the public's concerns and to address those concerns. So I agree with you that the issue, it's a media issue, present company excluded.
Yeah.
But
we can only try. But yeah.
Yeah, when we focus on a couple of extreme cases and the public understands that to be the norm, that's where we as an industry are challenged to really explain to the public what our industry is about.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we can't complain about public perception. We have to act on it, and we have to be better at telling our story.
Yeah. I had a thought too, and the other day I was driving thinking about that I think the Industrial Revolution, there's a lot of pride for what was built from that. Heavy industry just sort of exploded across the globe. And I think now the next phase of it, which to me is really exciting, and it's certainly not a conservative or a sort of more liberal position on how things should be done, but I think we're now in this, we've built it, now how do you make it the greenest it can be, the most efficient it can be, the most beneficial to the communities? That's that next challenge of mankind, and it's quite an exciting time for me.
Very interesting. I should send you my speech to Nipissing University graduates, because I talk about that the new business model,
Mm-hmm.
where profit is the enabler, not the end goal.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
In other words, there's a number of things that a business, and that's how we modeled cementation. Our vision is to change the industry. It wasn't to make a lot of money. It was to change the industry for the benefit of all stakeholders. So first is recognizing the stakeholders, and certainly the public, our employees, there's different groups that are stakeholders beyond the shareholders. And, the invisible hand, if you go to Adam Smith and Wealth of Nations and some great stuff there about international trade, which I won't go into, but, the origins of capitalism. But the theory there was the invisible hand, which is the market, will govern, so you don't need to legislate it. And, the invisible hand was invisible during the financial meltdown. Capitalism wasn't governing itself. And, the next evolution of capitalism, and we're seeing it now, where companies are not only looking at profit to shareholders, but they have to look at long-term benefits to the community, to stakeholders. And, I see a point in time where that will be the primary goal. And in order to do that, you have to be profitable.
Mm-hmm.
Not the other way around. Not you're doing all this stuff so you can make money.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're making money so you can do all this stuff.
Right.
Right.
And I see that happening in some areas. And I think it's a generational change too.
Mm-hmm.
I think younger people have a different view. There isn't that, was it Michael Douglas that greed is good, that philosophy?
yeah.
And that, was it Wall Street? I can't remember the movie, but
Yeah, I think it was.
you know, that philosophy, that was only half a joke then. You know, we think that's a joke, but back then there were a lot of people living that, that was their dream, the big money dream.
Yeah.
And I don't see that with young people now. I mean, people want to make money and have a good quality of life, but we talk about money again as an enabler personally too.
Yeah.
It allows you to have that quality of life and to have education for your kids and do all the things that you want to do.
Yeah.
So the same analogy in business. It's not the end goal, but you have to be profitable in order to be sustainable and to do all those other things you want to do, like change the industry for the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I could ramble on. I had one coffee this morning and I'm already rambling. So half a coffee, I think. So
Yeah. No.
good coffee.
Thank you.
Thank
Eddie.
you.
Yeah, it is such an important topic, and you know we try to merge technical and sort of that, and I think greed is about taking, you know, and I think but vision can push both you forward and the stakeholders forward, and I think vision, I don't think that ever goes out of style. I don't think that should. I mean, it can. There's have cultures that have went way too far where it's just basically, you know, a state run, and it's, you know, and that has never really worked. But that word vision, and it can. There's so much that goes into that. Whether it's a greener future, more productive, you know, better way of life, you know, all those sort of things. And I think maybe that's a little bit more where we're on a there's always a negative, but on the positive, I think we are moving in towards it. People really are. Better quality of life allows you to have more vision.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
And you know, it's a very interesting discussion, and you know, the whole concept of vision. In the old days, it was we're targeting this level of dividend for our shareholders, and you as an employee, how exciting is that to you? Not very inspiring. And there's groups, you know, certainly the Apples and the Googles, although I don't like to compare to them because normal businesses, you should not draw analogies to Google or Apple, but there's more and more companies now that recognize that in order to engage their employees, money doesn't do it. And I don't mean paycheck, but I mean, you know, the profit factor doesn't do it. Cementation's been recognized for a number of years as one of the top 100 employers in Canada. And we pay our people well, but I think we go far beyond that in how we engage our employees. And more companies are focused on that engagement now. And that's great to see. That's one of the shifts from that profit motive to that enablement and that vision, like you talked about. So,
absolutely. Well, I know you have events to get to, and you're what's the event that you're at right now?
It's called CopperCom. So the Metallurgical Society of the CIM is hosting it. It goes to different countries, different years. It's in Canada this year in Vancouver. There's probably about 1,000 delegates there. They're focused on copper, as you might have figured out. There's a range of presentations from technical to more general about the industry. And they in the plenary, they did a link with Glencore did a link with one of their factories in Europe. So it was a live link, and so the managers of their smelter were walking us through the smelter on screen. It was, you know, it was a great way to kick off the conference. And so we've seen some really good presentations, and there's different technical streams. That's just one of the CIM societies and the type of thing they do. So that technical knowledge sharing. But another thing great about the industry is all these companies are coming out and sharing their great ideas. So it's an innovation pot, so to speak, although not structured as, but you can see what Glencore or Freeport-McMoRan or Teck or different groups are doing, and they're sharing that with the industry.
Yeah. Well, and we'll put some links and everything in the show so that people can find it. And Roy, thank you for coming on the show. I really do appreciate
Oh,
it.
thanks for
Great
the
to have you.
invite. I really enjoyed it.
Thank
Finding
you.
time in a
Thank you.
busy while you're at
Yeah.
an event, so
Yep.
coming all the way here.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna do a quick sign off.
Yes.
Where can people find us, Gowdy? Follow us, like us, comment. Tell us how we can be better.
Yes, please do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can follow us at Crownsmen P through Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of social media. You can also email us info@crownsmen.com for any advice, or if you have comments on the show, how we can do better, or any topics you'd like to see on the show as well.
Yeah.
Or any guests that you think should be on the show, send us their info and we'll definitely contact them. You can also listen to the podcast on Anchor and lots and lots.
wherever you get your podcast.
Yes, I won't go. It's a huge list. But anywhere we're there. All the major platforms like Google, Apple, and Spotify, we're definitely on there, so you can listen to us there as well. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Gowdy. Thank you again to Roy Slack for coming on the show. That was a great time having him here.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching. We want to be the voice of industry, and all we mean by that is facilitate the experts and the leaders in the industry, giving them a platform to unpack what their companies offer and what they offer. And so it's just a great honor for us. And thank you very much for listening.